for the drums.
Hey, Jonathan.
Hey, Keith. What's going on today?
I've got now the third mental model. I'm doing
Mm-hmm.
this series on mental models. You're doing a series on totals. Robert
Mm-hmm.
is doing a series on everyday design practices. And hopefully we can weave them all together. This is
Mm-hmm.
this is the third actual mental model in my series of mental models. And we're really just sort of building and scaffolding and kind of peeling the onion back um, in order to construct an awareness and an understanding of how to think when you're working in Tableau, because a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
tips and tricks out there kind of focus on what button to click, and
Mm-hmm.
and what I'm trying to build here is more of a framework of how to think.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as just the third mental model, really we're just at the beginning. We're really kind of
Mm-hmm.
just kind of setting the stage, and we're going to go deeper. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what this is all about is the very first question to ask when you sit down with a new data set. So you have some new data set, you're working with it for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Could be one logical table, could be multiple logical tables. The very first question to ask with any new data set, bar none, do nothing else first, ask this one question first. And I arrive at this mental model thanks very much to our friend Joshua Milligan. So
Yeah.
Josh is a Tableau
Mm-hmm.
visionary, good friend for a long time. And this mental model I picked up from Josh from his blog post way backs in the 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll put a link up to it here, just a simple post from Josh 8 years ago. And just like some of your grand total stuff, you're actually teaching from when you were first learning Tableau, how you came to learn about
Mm-hmm.
about the totals. Here, this is when I first was learning Tableau 8 years ago. Josh helped me with this, and he says very simply, when you sit down with a new data set, the very first question that you need to ask always is, what does this number mean?
Mm-hmm.
Some number of records.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is that?
Well, isn't that we don't even see that anymore in Tableau, though?
Right, right. So when you go
Yeah.
to look at his blog
So.
post
Mm-hmm.
from
Mm-hmm.
2015, it'll be the first question to
Yep.
ask is,
Okay.
what does this mean? Right now, today we've
Mm-hmm.
got the data model, logical
Mm-hmm.
tables, and there will come a day that, in fact, maybe some of the people watching this episode don't even know what we're talking about when we say some number of
Yep.
records, because now there's
Mm-hmm.
logical tables, and instead what we would have is a count of orders, if we're talking about the orders logical table, or a count of
Mm-hmm.
people, if it's the people logical table, a count of records in a
Yep.
logical table.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's really an advantage, a benefit of the data model, is being able to work with multiple granularities inside of a single data source. But if
Mm-hmm.
we refer back to Joshua's post from 8 years ago, back then you could just have one granularity in a data source, and that was this
Yep.
some number of records.
Mm-hmm. So what does it mean?
Right, right. And so this is
Mm-hmm.
really kind of what I'm getting at with the essence of this series is,
Mm-hmm.
can we think deeply about these things that we work with every day, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
we talk a lot about granularity just as a practice in what we do every day. We talk a lot about aggregation. We use these words all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but did we ever stop to think really deeply, like, what is this thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I've got my slide here that shows, different seeds and grains of rice and grains of barley and grains, right? So we're always working
Mm-hmm.
with this stuff called granularity,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in principle, what I'm communicating here is that we could have a data source that has, like we discussed, multiple logical tables in it, multiple
Mm-hmm.
grains, even in the same data source. Um,
Yep.
And so what Joshua is getting at with this first question to ask is, what does in each logical table, in each data set that I'm working with, one record represents what?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Is it items in the basket at the checkout? Is it versions of software, right? And this question is really important because, as we talked about in an earlier mental model, we can link to it here. The earlier mental model was that Tableau prefers tidy data, right? And if we're
Yep.
working with tidy data, then every record is going to represent a new observation of variables, right? And if what we're attempting to do is to make sense of the data, then you really want to answer this question first. I have one new observation for each which set of dimensions, right?
Can I jump in 1 second
Sure.
on that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that for me, there's a piece here, and I love the grains of seeds and other things in that because it's a physical representation, and a way I've come to think of this model is we need to match, to use the term mental model about our data. There's the way the data is represented in the system, and then there's how we're thinking about the data. And I was just working with some survey data as an example of this. And in the survey data coming out of Microsoft Forms, in this case, there's one record per respondent, person responding to the survey. And to and so every question is its own column. Um, and we can certainly analyze that, but it works better in Tableau. And Steve Wexler's done a ton of great work on working with survey data. If we pivot those questions so we have one row per respondent and the question, or one row per response.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that piece of, and in a lot of cases when we're working with Tableau, that's the mental model we want to use when we're working with Tableau, is one row per response. But the data comes out of most survey tools, one row per respondent. And so we're at this different grain. So I see this piece of, let's look at the data and understand how it is represented in this, physically represented in the system.
Yeah, that's right. Because we've talked
Yeah.
about earlier
Mm-hmm.
these two definitions of data:
Mm-hmm.
facts and figures gathered together for analysis,
Mm-hmm.
reference and analysis, or characters and symbols stored for computation on a computer,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what we want to do
Yeah.
here with this first question to ask is to confirm that the physical representation of the data is
Mm-hmm.
matching with the business definition of the analysis that we're trying to perform, and that this I have
Yep.
one new record for each what question is
Mm-hmm.
in alignment with the problem that I'm trying to solve or the question I'm trying to answer.
Yep. Totally.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've got your survey responses
Mm-hmm.
example. I've got an
Mm-hmm.
example from Superstore. So I
Okay.
just kind of want to walk people through like how is it
Mm-hmm.
that I would go about answering this first question.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we're going to do some visual profiling here. We've got just kind of a simple
All
canvas,
right. Mm-hmm.
Tableau Superstore. And these
Mm-hmm.
days, now there's multiple logical tables. So this version of Superstore that I'm dealing with has an orders logical table, a
Mm-hmm.
people logical table, and a returns logical table. And
Mm-hmm.
so really, like you aptly named, we're going to want to answer this first question for really every logical table in the data source, right? Because they could each
Mm-hmm.
come at different grains.
Yes.
Here, what I've got on the screen is we're just looking at the orders table.
Mm-hmm.
And I've pulled out the combination of product ID and order ID onto the rows.
Mm-hmm.
And I've put the count of the orders table, that some number of records from the orders table, onto both the
Yep.
color shelf and the text.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is kind of my practice. I use the color shelf because what the color shelf is showing me there is that there are some combinations of product ID and order ID that have two records because the color legend, that continuous color legend, goes up to two.
Mm-hmm. And a handy part about that, Um, why we do that is because, let's say we're looking at a data source where there's a million combinations of product and order ID. We don't want to have to scan through a million rows of data in the Tableau window to find it out. There's this summary piece that we can get in literally one drag and drop action
Boom.
with
Right.
that color legend and see it.
Right. So this is my
Yep.
practice. And now I want to run something
Mm-hmm.
by you, because this is
Mm-hmm.
the orders table.
Yep.
And what's interesting is when I do that, it's not millions, but there's 10,183 rows.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what I'm getting back
Yep.
is that this logical table has about 10,000 records in it. And except for maybe 10 of them, and then maybe about a dozen of them, there's one record for every unique combination of order ID and product ID.
Mm-hmm.
But just a handful of them, just like this kind of exceptional odd lot of a few, have two records each.
Mm-hmm. And can I add one thing to that, which is the there's also in Tableau, we're not showing this in this animation right now. It will also show the total of the count of orders in the status bar. And so in this case, it would be 10,193. So it wouldn't match the marks count and would be, that's kind of just another little clue when we're trying to understand that granularity. We're not showing one row for every row of data. We're not
Right.
showing one row of table in our Tableau window for every row of data. There's multiple rows. So there's multiple ways we can discover that. There's the count of orders being 2. That's the nice and easy obvious one. There's another little indicator as well that I use sometimes.
Right, totally. So this
Yep.
view here is an aggregate view that is the Tableau
Mm-hmm.
query process. That
Mm-hmm.
the canvas level of detail, we'll talk about that in a future mental model, is
Mm-hmm.
product ID and order ID. And if you're trying to
Yep.
reproduce this in your own Tableau desktop, I needed to show hidden fields, because for some
Mm-hmm.
reason Tableau ships with one of the two IDs had been hidden.
One thing to know about that is Tableau changes the version of Superstore
Pretty
from
frequently.
version to version.
Yeah.
And so the grain that we're demonstrating here might not be the grain in your Superstore, depending on what version of Tableau you're using.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
This
So
this
this
was
is a
this
way
was the
to,
one that was on my Tableau desktop that I have at the moment, 2020 something dot
yeah.
something. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So it's great to abstract it out with the video, just that we're not going to get stuck in the why isn't it the same.
Yeah. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
first question to ask, what is the grain of this
Mm-hmm.
logical table?
I don't know.
To me, I'll tell you my answer. To me, the grain of this
Mm-hmm.
logical table is product and order. I've got one record for every unique combination of products in the
Mm-hmm.
basket at the time of checkout for each order, but there's a handful of problem statements where there's some duplicates. And so in the process of answering this, I mean, I've got 10,000 records that all agree
Mm-hmm.
and like 8 of them that disagree. To me, there's
Mm-hmm.
some kind of business issue that might have happened. So already in answering the first
Mm-hmm.
question, I've arrived at my second question.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that only 8 of these things have a duplicate?
Mm-hmm.
And what is it? What is it that led to those couple of records having a duplicate when
Mm-hmm.
everything else is at the unique
Yep.
combination of order and product?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So we're both going at the same thing. I'm saying I don't know because I'm in that I don't know place, and you have a
I
hypothesis
have a
of
hypothesis.
of of what it might be, but
Right.
you're in the place of not knowing.
Right. And I'm in a
Yep.
place of not
Mm-hmm.
knowing. And now I have my next action I can go take,
Mm-hmm.
which is to take these order and product IDs and go upstream and chase them down. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Or there's the other place that I'll do, and this goes into Tableau as a tool for visual analytics. We can select those rows really quickly, right click, keep only,
Yep.
and then start digging in and see, okay, what fields might be different in them.
Yep.
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 And I'll give one example of that that happened with me early on, where I was working with some hospital data, and there we had one record per encounter in the data and everything, and the data was like that. And then one day our readmission rate just tripled, kind of thing. So, and it's one of those cases where you have a big denominator and a very small numerator in that of people who are coming back to the hospital, and our readmission just, it's not going to go up. Like, it will go up,
Yeah, but it's not going to move that much.
up and down, but it's not going to go up that fast. And it turned out of like 300 fields in this data source, there was a versioning field that had started, for some reason, there started being some different record versions in it. And we had all the record versions, and it was that was causing me to have the extra records
Yep, for sure. And in this case,
for
I
that.
believe, if I remember correctly,
Mm-hmm.
I did what you said. I kept only on
Mm-hmm.
those that were anomalies. I said
Mm-hmm.
view all data. I looked at all the underlying fields and I scrolled across to
Mm-hmm.
look at all the things. And what should have been a measure had two different numbers. And so what should have been
Mm.
a unique observation for the one combination of thing, I think it might have been discount, if I'm remembering correctly. There were
Mm-hmm.
two discounts for the same order,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yep.
so then if that's the case, what it means is that probably this table is meant to be at the level of detail of product and order, or maybe there's a valid
Mm-hmm.
business reason why discount is actually a dimension.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that the level
Yeah.
of detail of this data is product and order and discount, if that's the case,
Mm-hmm.
right? But this
Yep.
illustrates really the crux of the mental model is that before you go attempting to answer any secondary follow-on question with any data set ever, the
Mm-hmm.
very first question to ask, according to Joshua, which I have never asked any other question ever since reading that post for the last 8 years,
Mm-hmm.
is what's the grain of the stuff that I'm working with?
Yep. Yeah. And it's also a case for me of somebody might have great documentation, um, but that is incredibly rare.
Mm-hmm.
That so often their documentation, but then there were changes later on that never totally filtered through to what I'm being given. And this is validating those hypotheses of what the data is against the actual data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Like I'm the analyst in the seat. I need to confirm it for myself that I know what I'm working with.
Yeah. Yeah. It's part of our job responsibility in
Mm-hmm.
returning accurate results.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So just to kind
And
of wrap up here, this is the Tableau query process, right, that we've talked about.
mm-hmm.
And like you mentioned just a moment ago, when we drag out the dimensions onto the canvas and we use that count of records in the logical table on the color shelf, we're very quickly doing an aggregate scan across what could be millions of records in order to do some visual profiling. Um, and this then is that cycle of visual analysis that helps us to first things first orient ourselves. And as we get deeper into these mental models, we're going to be getting, kind of a little bit further down into the
Mm-hmm.
rabbit hole. And one of the things that I really enjoyed when I showed you this mental model about the Tableau query process, your
Mm-hmm.
immediate response was you said, this is one of those places where all models are wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but some models are useful,
Yep.
right? This is
Mm-hmm.
precisely that, because this is a
Mm-hmm.
dramatic oversimplification of what's actually going on. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll get into subsequent conversations about dimensions and measures and granularity and aggregation. But if I was to pick it out, just inside of this one place, I've got here easily 8, and in fact, I didn't mention a few of them, 9, 10
Mm-hmm.
different locations
Wow.
where there's differing levels of granularity,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so if it's our aim to make sense of the data and then communicate that sense to others, the very
Mm-hmm.
first question to ask is, what's the grain of the original data that I'm connecting to? Because only then can
Mm-hmm.
I begin to think about how and where and when and on which occasions and for which reasons and in which locations am I going to modify that granularity as a part of my subsequent analysis.
Mm-hmm. And going to add to that, because the piece of this, I'm loving all these different parts of it. Like when you talk about going back to the original data, to me that means the original unfiltered data, because so often we've got a new data set and we know we're going to need to filter it for certain time periods, certain regions, or so on. And the piece of that is there might be stuff going on in the data that is hidden because we've narrowed down what we're looking at, and we need to really see that whole picture of it. That it's like, okay, we might have some idea of like, all right, there's only one SKU for each product, for example.
Mm.
And maybe it turns out that there can be multiple products or multiples of the same product name, but they actually have different SKUs kind of thing. And it just so happened if we're only looking at 1 month of data, we're only seeing that and we're not going to see that larger picture.
Yep. And in many
Yeah.
cases, the
Mm-hmm.
grain of that original data that I'm connecting to, it's not actually that original because the data that I'm receiving has already been aggregated.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I take that first definition of data, facts and figures gathered together for reference and analysis, and I'm having those business conversations with other parts of the organization, we need to
Mm-hmm.
make sure that the data that I received already had been aggregated and it's not as granular as it was
Mm-hmm.
when it really originated in the original
Oh
transactional
yeah.
system.
Mm-hmm. I
Know all
have an
about that.
example of that where it was somebody gave me a data set and there were $4 billion of grants in that data set that could not be explained.
Mm,
Yep. Like the data set was supposed to contain like $8 billion of grants and it contained $12 billion of grants. Where'd they come from? I don't know, because I could only see so much in the data set from the way it had been aggregated beforehand.
right, exactly. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So that's one place in this discovery is we may need to be going back to the business owners of that data to go, what is this really?
Yep, for sure. And so
Mm-hmm.
this then is kind of this cycle of visual analysis,
Mm-hmm.
scaffolding these mental models. And this was the third in our sequence. With every new data set, what is the first question to ask?
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about why is this important? Well, really, it's just kind of the difference between having a right triangle and a wrong triangle.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have set about to answer a certain question and your starting assumptions were incorrect or you misunderstood things from the very beginning, then
Mm-hmm.
everything downstream it follows uh, is going to have originated from a bad thought at first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Or another metaphor for me that I think about, because I have carpenters in my family, and so I grew up like following them with a hammer as a little kid, and this is the foundational piece of all of the analysis that comes after comes from this data. And if our understanding of that doesn't match the data as it exists, so the data is like this and our understanding is tilted like your triangle, then all of our analysis is going to head off in that direction and be wrong.
Wrong.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's making sure we've got that flat, straight foundation that we can then build our visualizations from.
We can build on top of so that we don't put the roof
Mm-hmm.
onto the building and find that all of the walls are slanted. Yeah.
Yeah, because the worst time to find that is
After.
presenting data to somebody who knows it really well,
Mm,
and finding out that your analysis is wrong because of a fundamental misunderstanding.
from the very beginning. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's it. That's this
Yeah.
one. I'm going to attempt
Mm-hmm.
to end each of these with a little bit of a kind of word of wisdom or a Zen cone.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, It is that you can open your eyes to the grain of data and insights can be known. But if you close your eyes to the grain of data, then all you can feel is grit.
Hmm.
Okay, so that was
Wow.
it. Thanks a bunch. We'll see you
Awesome.
next time for
Thank
the
you.
next one.
Great. Bye.
Bye.
Action Analytics.